I'm Joy. Standing at the courthouse steps, I take a deep breath. The air is crisp, and the sky, though overcast, shows signs of brightening. I've just finalized my divorce, a formality that felt more like a liberation. Ryan, my ex-husband, sat across from me in the courtroom, looking smug as if he'd won some great victory. But for me, it was the end of a long, suffering chapter. I remember the day it all started to fall apart. Ryan and I lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. I was always the one who took care of the home, making breakfast every morning. That fateful day, the morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and eggs, a comforting scent that usually meant stability. Ryan sat down at the table with that relaxed ease of someone who thought the world revolved around him. He complimented my breakfast, but his words felt like background noise. He then casually asked me to pull out his gray suit for a week-long seminar in Milwaukee. There was a strange detachment in his tone, like he was leading up to something. Suddenly, he set down his fork, wiped his mouth, and looked at me with rehearsed eyes. Joy, he began softly, I'm in love with someone else, and she's pregnant. I owe you honesty. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Just the night before, he'd kissed me goodnight and told me he loved me. Now, he was dismantling our marriage as if it were a business deal. He went on to say that this other woman, Lily, deserved a complete family, and he couldn't walk away from his responsibility. He even had the audacity to reach across the table and offer me comfort, saying he wished the best for me and hoped we could stay friends. I was too stunned to speak. I sat there, watching him as he packed his bag and left, like my world was collapsing around me. The apartment that had once been our home now felt like a prison. Every piece of furniture, every curtain I'd chosen, mocked me. I thought about destroying everything, but I knew it would only make me look irrational. So, I left the apartment and walked to the park. At the park, I sat on a bench under a maple tree. The simple, normal life around me made me envy others. I wondered if I'd been blind to the signs of Ryan's betrayal. I tried to calm myself, telling myself not to fall apart. But the reality was that in a week, I'd have to leave this place, and Lily would take my place. When I returned to the apartment, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Clara Thompson, noticed my distress. She invited me into her warm, small apartment filled with bookshelves and crocheted blankets. It smelled of chamomile and lavender. I finally found the courage to tell her what had happened. Clara shared her own story. When she was my age, her husband had an affair. She forgave him and even raised the son he had with the other woman. But in the end, he left anyway, and she spent 20 years in a lonely marriage. She warned me not to go back to Ryan, saying a man who betrays once will do it again. Her words cut deep, but they also gave me a strange strength. The next morning, I found a large envelope in the mailbox. It was a petition for the dissolution of marriage from the Cook County Circuit Court. Ryan had already filed without even discussing it with me. I felt humiliated and broken, but something inside me hardened. I knew there was nothing left to salvage. I called my mother, Sarah. Her warm voice on the phone was a relief. I told her everything, and she immediately said I could come home. My brother, Tom, and his wife, Lisa, and their son, Ben, came to help me pack. As we were packing, Ryan's mother, Mrs. Helen Davis, showed up. She was furious, accusing me of theft. She said the apartment and everything in it belonged to Ryan because he paid the rent. But Tom stood up for me, saying I was entitled to my belongings. Helen was relentless, calling me ungrateful and saying I was stripping the apartment out of spite. I stood tall and told her I was only taking what I had bought and worked for. I didn't want anything that reminded me of Ryan. My mother also joined in, telling Helen she had no right to belittle me. In the end, Tom placed the last set of keys on the counter, and we left the apartment. At my parents' home, I felt safe for the first time in days. But I knew I couldn't stay there forever. One evening, Lisa suggested I go to the house my late aunt, Rose, had left me in Wisconsin. It was a modest property near a small town that I hadn't thought about in years. I decided to take the bus. The journey was long and monotonous. I replayed Ryan's words and Helen's insults in my head, but the rhythm of the road pulled me further away. When I arrived in Greenfield, Wisconsin, the town was small and quiet. The house was in a terrible state. The white siding was stained gray, shutters hung loose, and the porch sagged. Inside, it was a mess: furniture overturned, broken glass everywhere, and a sour smell. But I refused to give up. I told myself this was mine, and I would reclaim it. The next morning, as I was cleaning, I found a note in a dresser drawer. It was from a woman named Mrs. Amelia Reed, saying she was being held against her will by a man named Mr. Henry Reed, who was not who he claimed to be. He and his people were involved in property scams. Just then, there was a knock at the door. It was Henry, smiling like a friendly neighbor. He brought me sandwiches and coffee. I had to play along, even though I was terrified. I told him I was a vegetarian, so the sandwiches would be wasted. He seemed to accept it but watched me too closely. After he left, I knew I was in danger. I took photos of the note and sent a message to Tom. He told me to stay calm and that he'd call the sheriff's office. As evening fell, I rigged makeshift alarms around the house. I was so scared, but I had to protect myself. Finally, Tom and the sheriff's deputies arrived. They found Amelia hidden in the woods. Henry was arrested, and I felt a sense of safety for the first time in a long while. A week later, I was back in Chicago. I signed a lease for a small apartment near my parents' home. It was a one-bedroom place with a modest kitchen and a balcony overlooking maple trees. There were no reminders of Ryan here. Now, as I stand at the courthouse steps, I look out at the city. The betrayal nearly broke me, but it also made me stronger. I'm moving forward, not backward. The future is mine to claim, and I'll face it with the quiet strength I've earned through all these trials.